an exhibition tour of Surrealist Suggestions, curated by our guest curator, Lindsay Inglis. My name is Blair Fornwald, and I'm the director curator of the School of Art Gallery. The School of Art Gallery, the School of Art, and the University of Manitoba are in Treaty 1 territory. This is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of both past and present, and we dedicate ourselves to doing better, to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. If you are joining us from elsewhere, I encourage you to think about your relationship to the land that you are on and to its original caretakers. The School of Art Gallery is generously supported by the University of Manitoba, the School of Art Galleries, the School of Arts faculty and staff, national and provincial funding agencies, donors, and volunteers. The work that we do wouldn't be possible without our fantastic team, which includes Donna Jones, C.W. Brooks, Jane Borbridge, Glenn Johnson, and Zoe LeBrun. We also receive tremendous support from the School of Art Gallery faculty and staff. For this exhibition, I want to acknowledge a special thank you to Dan Delignes, who provided access to and tremendous knowledge of the fascinating works in the Pat Bovey Print Study Archive, some of which are in the exhibition, to Kaylin Harrison for her assistance with tonight's talk, and to Dr. Oliver Botar, who helped put Lindsay in touch with Robert Nielsen, who is the central figure in the story that is told in Surrealist Suggestions. I would also like to thank the team at the Winnipeg Art Gallery, especially Stephen Boris and Mandy Hyatt, for lending us works by Marcel Dzama, Don Proch, and Esther Warkov. To Season Hope for loaning us Marcel Dzama's video, A Game of Chess, which is exhibited in the gallery lobby. And to artist Elena Oh for lending us work from her personal collection. Additional adjunct programming for this exhibition was presented in partnership with the Winnipeg Film Group, and we would like to thank them for being fantastic partners, especially acknowledging the support of James Asmundson and the late Dave Barber, who helped us put together 2 free screenings that Lindsay curated of surrealist films from Winnipeg this summer. We would also like to thank the National Film Board for lending us June Night by Mike Maruniak, which was part of one of those screenings. And of course, I would like to thank our guest curator, Lindsay Inglis, for her insightful look at the legacy of surrealism at the School of Art. This exhibition is also a testament to the ways that artistic communities coalesce and to the tremendous impact that an approachable, relatable, and congenial mentor can have on a person's artistic and social development. It's been incredibly gratifying to have the gallery open for this exhibition, first by appointment and now by general admission in accordance with public health guidelines. Many of the visitors that I've spoken to have close and in some cases, decades-long relationships with the artists in this show. We've had some really lovely repeat visitors. And one remarked that visiting the exhibition is like catching up with old friends. I've like brought friends to the exhibition, and it's just so nice to chat with them. It's a really beautiful feeling. And I think it's a really apropos exhibition that marks the 100th year of the University of Manitoba's Alumni Association and coincides with this year's, no doubt, emotional homecoming. So it's really nice to be kind of coming home to the gallery and doing things in person or in this kind of hybrid model. To that end, I'd like to announce that the gallery is now open. It's open from 9 till 5, Monday to Friday. You can check out Surrealist Suggestions, watch Marcel Dzama's Game of Chess, and see Playful Application, which is an exhibition of posters commissioned for the 1972 Munich Games, which is curated by Shani Labudu. All of those shows are open until September 24th, and we would be happy to see you there. Be sure also to join us next week. It is the same Zoom time, same Zoom place, next Wednesday at 7 p.m. For a curatorial tour of Playful Application by Shani Labudu, which is also going to feature a design relay race, featuring short and sweet talks by recent graduates of the School of Arts design program. You can find out more about this and the rest of our programs, both digital and in person, by visiting the School of Art Gallery's website, Facebook, or Instagram, or by emailing us and signing up for our newsletter or mailing list. Before I hand it over to Lindsay, I would like to note that we are recording this video and uploading it. We'll be uploading it to the School of Art Gallery's YouTube channel for posterity. We're also live streaming on YouTube, so hello to the people who are watching over there. I would like to ask that everyone make sure that their audio is muted. I know most of you have done this before, and that your camera is off. You can do this by clicking on the microphone and the camera icons at the lower left-hand corner of your screen. As you can see, we have ASL interpreters available for this talk. Their names are Christina and Shannon, and they're going to be trading off throughout the night. There's also closed captioning services available, which you can turn on and off by clicking on the little CC icon on the bottom of the screen. If you're having any trouble with these accessibility features, please message us in the chat window and we'll do our best to help you out. We would like to ask that you save any questions you have until the end of the talk. At that time, you can either use the chat function to ask your question, or you can unmute your audio, you can turn on your camera, and you can ask your question. Since we are also live streaming over on YouTube, we'll endeavor to collect your questions from there, and you can post them in the YouTube comments and we'll send them over to Zoom for Lindsay's consideration. And finally, it's a real honor and a pleasure to introduce Surrealist Suggestions curator, Lindsay Inglis. Lindsay is an art historian and writer from Treaty 1 territory. She holds a BFA from the University of Manitoba and an MA from the University of St. Andrews. Her research interests include surrealism, as well as disability in art and representations of the human body. Lindsay has contributed as a writer to Canadian Art, Galleries West, and Hasta magazine. And tonight she is joining us from Venice, where she is completing an internship at the Peggy Guggenheim Collection. So she's joining us, it's very late. Please welcome Lindsay Inglis. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just share my screen here. Okay. Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. I had a lot of fun putting this exhibit together. I really like everything that we were able to include, and I hope you guys got the chance to see it and enjoyed it. The inspiration for this exhibit came from an essay I wrote during my undergrad at the University of Manitoba. It focused on the impact Robert Nelson had, who was a student on, who was a professor at the School of Art in the 1950s. I was able to speak with Nelson during this time when I was researching for this project, and he told me so many stories about just the friendships that he had had with his students. He came to the School of Art during a very transitional time in the 1950s. A group of American artists had come to Winnipeg to teach at the school, and they radically modernized the curriculum. They introduced abstract art and discouraged the previously favored academic style. Nelson joined the faculty in 1953. He was the youngest of the teaching staff and became close friends with all of his students. As the only surrealist among a cohort of abstractionists, Nelson introduced surrealism into Winnipeg and had a lasting influence on his students. This exhibition was a chance to bring that research into the present day, to look past his direct influence and see how surrealism was manifested in Winnipeg after he left. As you'll see, he was a major influence for Ivan Eyre, who then inspired generations of Winnipeg artists. So Nelson was from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He moved to Chicago after World War II to study at the School of the Art Institute. Along with printmaking, Nelson also studied art history, which is where he encountered surrealism for the first time. He was very inspired by Picasso, which I think is quite clear in this painting here, The Dancer. He moved to Winnipeg in 1953 after completing his MFA. He was in his late 20s at the time, and he was very close in age with students. When I talked to him, he described himself as not exactly the professorial type that his students were used to seeing. You could tell he really connected and identified with his students. He told me that they were all young and pink and smiling with funny looking clothes on, and there I was, older and pink and smiling with the same funny clothes. I spoke with one of his students as well, Barry Nelson, who had so many amazing things to say about Robert Nelson. And when I spoke to him, he said that Nelson stood out among his professors and even commented on Nelson's clothes, saying that he always wore black corduroy suits with colorful vests that his wife had made him. They hadn't been in touch for a number of years, and after our conversation, Barry Nelson actually reconnected with Robert Nelson, which was really nice to see and kind of be a part of. Nelson described his students as responsible, mature, and honest people. He called them an alert group and noted that they were all receptive to other people's opinions on art. Nelson would sometimes hire his students as babysitters when he was out of town. And then on a few occasions, he also got calls asking him to bail them out of jail. When he told me about this, he followed up by saying that they were in the business of living and that he respected that. While School of Art students in the 1950s were living lives rich in experience, many did not have firsthand knowledge of contemporary art. Their only exposure to art came from pop culture, such as comic books, magazine illustrations, and advertisements. The American teachers at the School of Art played a vital role in introducing their students to works of contemporary art and expanding their art historical knowledge. To assist with his teachings, Nelson established a weekly film night at the School of Art and often invited his students to his apartment in the evenings where they would discuss art, exhibitions, and art theory. As a young, optimistic professor, Nelson believed that people came to the School of Art to learn from each other. He thought that the environment at the School of Art really emulated that, and that he explained that while his students learned a lot from him, he also learned a lot from them. As part of their education, Nelson brought his students on a field trip to Chicago. This was the first time many of these students were able to see major artworks in person. They visited many galleries, and including the Art Institute and a furniture factory that was run by Nelson's friends from art school. While they were there, Nelson took his students to a party at that factory. The following day, several students had disappeared, and Nelson had to run around the city finding them all. He never took another trip to Chicago, in part because he thought it wasn't fair to take students away from their studio time, but also because he was terrified of losing them again. He resigned from the School of Art in the summer of 1956. After just 3 short years. He moved to Grand Forks and began teaching at the University of North Dakota. Nelson told me that the hardest part of leaving Winnipeg for him was leaving the students that he had so many memories with and really treasured their experiences they shared. From reading about his students and speaking with Barry, it was clear that they treasured the memories they shared with him as well. Winston Leathers described Nelson as being one of the most influential instructors at the School of Art. Barry Nelson and McCleary Drope went to visit Nelson in Grand Forks several times. And in 1958, just 2 years after Nelson's departure, Ivan Eyre moved to Grand Forks to pursue a master's degree. Eyre later explained that while the university didn't have a strong fine arts program at the time, he went because he wanted to be taught by Nelson. I included these 3 prints and drawings by Nelson in the exhibit that I think would have influenced his students. A lot of these images have themes that are also reflected in the students' work at the time. And I thought it was also special that all 3 of these images here came from personal collections of previous students. I believe 2 of them are from Ivan Eyre's personal collection and 1 is from Winston Leathers. Since this project started out as an examination of the relationship between student and teacher, I thought it would be fun to exhibit some student work from the 50s as well, which are in these 2 cases here. Students like Ivan Eyre, Kathleen Coburn-Donnelly, and Kelly Clark are included both with their student work and with works from later in their careers. And then there's also student work from those whose practice shifted drastically after art school, such as Winston Leathers. I've also included work by Brenda Eyre, who's Ivan Eyre's wife. I believe they met in art school, and you don't really see her work compared to his work, who's quite well known, clearly. But I was really excited to include her work alongside of his. I've highlighted 2 works here from the student collection by Jack Schurz and Ernest Wilson. Ernie Wilson was only 8 years younger than Nelson. He graduated from the School of Art in 1955 and then traveled to Europe where he was able to meet Max Ernst, who's one of the founding members of the Surrealist movement. Wilson's work demonstrates excellent draftsmanship, which was noted by his professors and fellow students. Kelly Clark had referred to him as the star and mentioned that many students wanted to emulate his work. Wilson made several self-portraits over the years, all of which are believed to capture his striking features and brooding personality, both of which I think are quite clear in this portrait here. Wilson supported himself by working as a graphic designer and continued his artistic practice until his untimely death in 1987. Throughout his entire career, Wilson was an advocate for the arts community in Winnipeg. Jack Schurz graduated in 1957, then pursued an MA at Michigan State University. While in Winnipeg, he focused on printmaking, and many thought that he had a promising career as a printmaker. But while he was in Michigan, he started to specialize in ceramics. He's a very prominent figure in Canadian ceramics and was a member of the Regina Clay movement, the Regina Clay group. This group contributed to releasing ceramics from its traditional functional use and began using it as a sculptural medium. When Schurz began to gain recognition, he mentioned Nelson as one of his primary influences. He later became a professor at the University of Regina and explained that you can't teach anyone anything, but if you can inspire students, you can get them excited, they'll learn better. I try to teach by example. And I think that this philosophy is something that would have been emulated at the School of Art while he was there. Other students who are included in this exhibit are Sandra Kaplan, McCleary Drope, Brenda Fensk, Barry Nelson, Bill Reed, Don Reichert, and Kathy Vanderlinden. I spoke with Robert Nelson two times while I was writing that paper on him, and he told me that out of all the classes he had, the students he taught at the School of Art were some of the best drawing classes of his entire career, and that as someone who had taught for over 50 years, that was really saying a lot. Kathleen Coburn-Donnelly was one of Nelson's students. In the 1950s, the School of Art had a really strong printmaking program, as you can see from the student work. Kathleen is actually one of the only students from the 50s who continued printmaking after the School of Art. Despite this incredible program, after graduation, students no longer had access to the facility, and there were no other resources available to people who wanted to continue printmaking. Kathleen, however, she was awarded a Canada Council grant and bought her own press. After art school, she created a unique printing process using lacquered cards. She discovered this while trying to find safe materials to have around the house, since her at-home studio was in the vicinity of her young daughter, who was running around at the time. John Graham describes Kathleen as a sensitive and poetic interpreter, as well as an inventive and meticulous printmaker. This print, A Time to Play, is inspired by the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible. So next to Kathleen's print, we have an early Ivan Eyre. He had graduated from the School of Art in 1957, then went to North Dakota for a year to study under Nelson's guidance. After his MFA, he returned to Winnipeg and started teaching at the School of Art in 1959. There are two paintings by Eyre in this exhibition, as well as his student prints. I chose to display work from 1964 and 1992 to show the evolution of his work, especially since he's so influential and was an inspiration for so many artists in this show. Fractions and Abstractions is an earlier work painted just 5 years after returning to Winnipeg. Eyre has been quoted as saying, abstraction follows thought. It is fundamental because without abstraction, there is no art. His work developed as his work developed, he began painting more landscapes, and he would often include abstract forms within those paintings to obscure the landscape. Nancy Dillow, who used to be the chief curator at the WAG, she wrote that Eyre's artworks often deal with the conflict between man and nature, a conflict which leaves in its wake assorted objects to decay and in time be absorbed and overcome by nature. She believes that Eyre saw landscape as a vehicle for expressing the human state. You can kind of see him go full circle in this exhibit, starting with his student work, which is very realistic self-portraits, moving away to abstract, which plays with color and composition, and then his later work, which combines both elements. He returns to realism while bringing with him an incredible use of color and abstract form. Amy Karlinski describes Eyre as that he utilizes the conventions of realism and illusionism to create magical and mythical spaces and events. Throughout his practice, Eyre would repeat motifs in fractions and abstractions. For example, the triple head, which is seen in that orange square, it's also the sole subject matter of another painting he did that same year. And the bandaged figures in Table Tower 92 are present in a lot of Eyre's drawings and prints. While Nelson had quite an impact on students in the 50s, Ivan Eyre's artwork has been a major influence for students, for his students and for the generations to come. Eyre taught at the School of Art for just over 30 years, focusing on painting and drawing, and he retired in 1993. As I've said, he's a major figure in Canadian art. In 1974, he was elected to the Royal Canadian Academy. He's received multiple medals and is considered by many to be a national living treasure. After Eyre, we have Richard Gross, who was born in Poland and moved to Canada at the age of 6. He graduated from the School of Art in 1964. While he initially wasn't sure what he wanted to study, he became enamored with art making after studying art history. During his time at the School of Art, he was taught by Ivan Eyre and later explained that by the time of his second year, he was already very aware of the importance that Eyre was having on his work. Gross was friends with Kathleen Coburn-Donnelly, and they collected each other's works. In the late 60s, Gross was written about in the Globe and Mail. They described him as an unearthly artist. The specific wording was that there's something unearthly about what is happening to Richard Gross. This is because he didn't often show in local galleries, but by this time he was already in the collection of the National Gallery of Canada and the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Not long after graduation, Gross moved to Toronto and kind of disappeared from the art scene a bit. I found it very hard to find any information on him, but I really like his work, and I think he uses a unique blend of surrealism and symbolism. So the next artist is Esther Warkov. She never actually graduated from the School of Art. She dropped out after 3 years because she thought it was just a diploma. She had her first solo exhibit at the WAG 3 years after dropping out, and it established her as one of the leading figurative painters in Canada. Irony, wit, and dark humor are equally present in both Warkov's personality and her artwork. The title of this painting is "If Your Father Was a Carburetor and Your Mother Was a Fly, What Does That Make You?" I think that's a perfect example of her wit. It's also something I don't really remotely understand or have an answer to. So if anyone here has any ideas, please let me know, because I'd love to hear them. I like to call her the conscious surrealist because while her work is very notably surrealist, she really hates surrealism because she doesn't understand its emphasis on the unconscious. Because of this, she's really conflicted to her relationship with surrealism. In a sense, she's similar to many other surrealist women artists. Whitney Chadwick has written several books on creating a history around women in surrealism. And she's explained it that women who made significant contributions to the language of surrealism replaced the male surrealists' love of hallucination and erotic violence with an art of magical fantasy. And I think that very much describes Warkov's work as well. She was inspired by Ivan Eyre, who told her that art was storytelling. She herself believes that these stories don't need to be cohesive and that the narrative elements don't need to add up. Warkov's approach to storytelling is also supported by her choice of canvas, which often involve 3 or 4 grouped together. This fragmentary grouping of panels enables Warkov to create a complex mosaic of motifs. She's from the North End, where I believe she still lives, and memory and nostalgia play a very important role in her work. Winnipeg's Edwardian architecture is often present, and while she was growing up, her father owned a store in one of those buildings. Her iconography is built up from her own experiences, and they're often highly personal, yet because they are depicting Winnipeg landmarks and prairie landscape, they also feel very personal and relatable to a lot of Winnipeggers and people from the prairies. Beverly Rasparich has described this phenomenon by stating that Warkov is her own seer who transforms private visions into cultural treasures. Warkov gave up painting in 1984. She shifted her practice to drawing and later to three-dimensional drawing. Following Warkov, we have Suzanne Gautier, who graduated from the School of Art in 1969 with a focus on printmaking. After graduation, she formed an artists group with 7 of her fellow students called the Copper Guild. The students came together to buy a press and shared a studio space, which was their solution to the lack of resources that faced many artists in the 50s. The guild only lasted for a year before breaking up when everyone went their separate ways. During this time, Gautier moved to Iowa to pursue her master's degree. She later returned to Winnipeg to teach at the School of Art. She then briefly moved to Montreal before settling in Halifax, where she taught at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. While she has a strong printmaking background, she's also a multidisciplinary artist who's worked in drawing, sculpture, painting, and ceramics. Robert Enright has described her work as very unpredictable. Rather than thinking her way through her artwork, he believes that she feels her way through her content. This belief is shared by many who look at her work, including Randall McIlroy, who wrote, Suzanne Gautier is one of those rare sparks whose intellectualism is matched by her spirit. She makes you think, but she also makes you feel. Her work contains a great deal of drama, even though there isn't necessarily a storyline to follow along. Enright also describes her work as being both alienating and inviting, and that simultaneously she seduces and repulses her viewers. Her work is often character-driven, like Marcel Dzama, who we'll get to later. This print is from a series that involves a lot of horses, and she would sometimes include a self-portrait within these prints. Gautier doesn't offer any explanation for how this setting came to be, but leaves the viewer with the aftermath. You're therefore left to appreciate the image while coming up with your own narrative. So next we have Don Proch, who originally enrolled at the U of M to pursue engineering. He quickly switched to fine arts and graduated in 1964. He later reflected that Ivan Eyre was one of his strongest influences while in school. After graduating, he was one of the core members of the Grand Western Canadian Print Shop, which was founded in 1968. It made printmaking accessible for all its members. Their goal was to make original art that was financially accessible and reached a wide audience through relatable subject matter. Part of the ways they made their subject matter relatable was to portray the prairie landscape, which you can see in 3 furrows. Here, Don Proch uses a billowy cloud formation to create an eye within the landscape. Angela Davis later explained that at a time when painting and sculpture were the primary mediums of art making, printmaking became the rebellious technique in a socially rebellious time. Proch also works in sculpture. He's particularly known for these masks, which are often ominous and lead the viewer to fear what lies underneath. The night landing mask, however, rather than gives the illusion that someone is looking out, the viewer is encouraged to look in and see a landing strip. Proch wrote about the night landing mask, and he explained that the viewer may be investigative enough to visually inquire into the details of the structure to move from the exterior to the interior of the mask. With their face against the opening of the face of the mask, the viewer becomes masked and is therefore disguised to the viewers who may be observing this interaction. The disguising marks the true definition of the mask. Once disguised, the viewer moves from a passive to an active position, becoming a participant in the art process. So following the 3 furrows, we have 2 photographs by one of Don Proch's friends, Lee Sedman. Sedman went to school as a mature student and graduated in 1972. He met his wife, Shelley, in 1968 while studying at the School of Art. She was in the education department at the time. They married a year later in 1969, and Shelley actually posed for both of these photographs. Sedman was interested in experimenting with photography, which is how these were created. His entire time at art school was devoted to pushing the bounds of photography. After graduation, he joined his father's camera store, Sam the Cameraman. It was located where the new Hamayuk is today. Sedman was an advocate for photography in Manitoba. In the 80s, he donated a dark room to the Winnipeg Art Gallery, and in 1984, the director of the WAG, Terence Heath, consulted with Sedman on the best ways to grow their photography collection. He also started an annual lecture called Journey into Photography, which acted as a fundraiser for the WAG. So Kelly Clark graduated from the School of Art in 1958. He was also a student of Robert Nelson. He then obtained a Canada Council grant to study in England and then in Austria. His time in Europe was incredibly prolific. Surrounded by the London art scene, he took everything in and produced as much work as possible. On his return to Canada, he only brought back 40 paintings and left the rest behind. This then spurred an artistic lull for him. Once he was back in Canada, he took a break from art making and focused his career on as a folk singer, which is how he initially supported himself in art school. Since Clark was so talented in various artistic outlets, his friend and fellow member of the print shop, Bill Lobchuk, used to describe Clark as being a Renaissance man. Later on, when he wanted to return to art making, he became fascinated with Manitoba's landscape, specifically the Delta region at Lake Manitoba. Robert Enright refers to Clark's trips to the Delta region as pilgrimages. During this time, he also shared a studio with Don Proch, and the work they produced often referenced one another. This sculpture in Surrealist Suggestions, while not a landscape by any means, does make use of natural elements, such as the egg and the crab claw. The seemingly odd combination works really well together to create a peculiar musical figure. It's a really unique work for Clark since he mostly worked on paper and canvas, and it's really rare to see any sculptural work from him. I also kind of think it's just charming and cute that it's an egg. When George Swinton discussed Clark's work, he commented on how Clark never worked on a grand scale like many of his contemporaries. And I think it's really fitting that Clark's is the smallest work in the show. It's placed near the largest work in the show, which is by Caroline Dukes, which is the biggest size contrast in the show. Dukes originally, she initially studied sculpture at the Academy of Fine Arts in Budapest. She moved to Canada and completed her BFA from the School of Art in 1972. She studied under Ivan Eyre and was greatly influenced by his work. While the two of them have distinct styles that would never be confused for one another, they're both interested in eerie landscapes with mysterious figures. Her work is often compared to other artists in this exhibit, such as Eyre, Warkov, and Proch. She's set apart by being equally inspired by both the prairie and the Hungarian landscape. Dukes was part of a Jewish minority in Hungary, and after the war, she lived through the communist regime. She was studying sculpture in Budapest during a time when most of the work created represented happy, smiling soldiers, peasants, and workers. Once she started making work in Canada, she rebelled against this previously taught standard, and she started to create melancholic and eerie work. Duke's work from this period in which this painting was created centers around man's relationship to society and their surrounding environment. For this particular painting, Elizabeth Legg believes that the figure lying in the ground is meant to suggest the duality of comfort and alienation resulting from the individual's union with nature. She describes Duke's figures as being statue-like with generalized features. Duke was also making several sculptures around this time, and they look as though they are the figures in her paintings. Mary Reed argued that the unidentifiable figures simultaneously represent both the viewer and Duke's, and that this alludes to the concealed meanings and memories that an individual might bring to their own personal interpretation of the work. Next, there's Elena Oh, who studied art in Hong Kong before she moved to Canada and began studying at the School of Art with Ivan Eyre. She graduated in '78 and also acknowledges that Eyre had a major influence on her work. Oh has created a series of paintings which involve chairs floating above a prairie landscape, free from gravity and conscious thought. When explaining her On the Chair series, she said that, "To me, a chair is a vehicle where one's metaphysical being expands and travels in time and space while one's physical being remains in reality. The chair serves as an expression of fantasies and personal experience." From the chair series, she moved away from the chair and focused specifically on these anthropomorphic coats. As seen here in Rising Companions 2, the coats drift through the sky, interacting with each other as though they're old friends. They're no longer confined by the routines of their wearers. And I just find this to be a really charming painting that I really like. After Elena Oh, we have Diona Thorncroft. She's originally from Alberta and moved a lot as a kid because her father was in the military. She settled in Winnipeg after attending, she settled in Winnipeg while she started attending the School of Art and graduated in 79. She then went to the University of Wisconsin for her MFA. Like Eyre and Gautier, she then returned to teach at the School of Art as a professor. These images are from her Rabbit series, which caused a lot of controversy when they were exhibited. I believe these are drawings that she made from sculptures that were created out of dead rabbits and sometimes were combined with stuffed animals. She inserted photographs inside the rabbits, and as they decayed, their skin became translucent, and the longer they were exhibited, the more visible the photographs became. These sculptures were displayed outside, hanging in trees. Thorncroft explained that the series was a representation for the circle of life, and that rabbits were a symbol of resurrection. As you can imagine, not everyone liked it, and the exhibit was met with a lot of backlash. Thorncroft continued working within the setting of a creepy forest. She created a photo series called The Black Forest, which is quite similar to her Group of Seven series. When discussing this work, she said that she was really interested in the grotesque, and last year she created a short film around the series called Black Forest Sanitarium. So the next artist in this exhibit, Christianus Catkins Gosslin, is the most recent grad from the School of Art. He graduated in 2006. He then moved to New York City and completed his MFA from Columbia University in 2008. He also returned to Winnipeg and taught at the School of Art for a brief period between 2011 and 2015. When talking about his influences while being a student at the School of Art, Catkins Gosslin said that his fellow students shaped the artist who he was today, and that while he was attending the School of Art, the professors were similar to the 1950s. They were very close friends with the students. Many of his works teeter the line between surrealism and abstraction, although instead of surrealism, he prefers the term magic realism. He considers living on the prairies to be a unique and special experience, and as a result, the prairie landscape is frequently represented. He's described his paintings as an ambivalent space between in which the personal meets the spectacle. The last artist represented in Surrealist Suggestions is Marcel Dzama, who graduated from the School of Art in 1997. He's a multidisciplinary artist born and raised in Winnipeg and is currently based in New York City. During his time in art school, he was one of the founding members of the Royal Art Lodge. It was a drawing collective that remained active until 2008. Dzama creates characters in his work. As you can see here, two of the drawings look like character lineups. These characters repeat themselves in a number of drawings, but like Esther Warkov, Dzama is not interested in creating a cohesive narrative. The scenarios he creates often contradict themselves, as do the characters' actions and personalities, especially as in the case in The Queen in A Game of Chess, but we'll get to that one later. When discussing Dzama's early drawings, James Patton wrote that, surrounded by expanses of blank paper, the drawings appear to exist outside the conventional context of time and space. He goes on to describe them as dreamlike memories. Patton believes that Dzama's very adult world of sex, violence, smoking, drinking, and dancing is so appealing because it seems unattainable, located in a nostalgic past on one hand, and from the perspective of youth in a future adult world on the other. This dualism of both nostalgia and futurism is another quality that Dzama's work has in common with Warkov. While visually their work is nothing alike, they're both simultaneously nostalgic and futurist, and they both contain uncohesive narratives. Deborah Solomon explains that in the wake of a flourishing avant-garde, what Dzama offers us in its place is a fairy tale about a world where art once tried to be path-breaking and revolutionary, and which lives on today as a story we tell and retell about a lost civilization. She believes that Dzama uses drawing more expressively than any other living artist in America or Canada today. I think his use of drawing is something that would have really been ingrained in him at the School of Art. From the beginning, the school has always had a strong focus on drawing. L.L. Fitzgerald was an excellent draftsman who began teaching at the school in 1924. He later became director for nearly 20 years. And then in the 1950s, Robert Nelson came in. Many of his students reminisced on how hard that he had pushed them to develop their drawing skills. And when I talked to Nelson, he even reflected on his time spent with Ivan Eyre, and he said that he thinks he might have pushed Ivan too hard to draw because he thought that Eyre was just such an excellent draftsman with really good hands. Eyre continued this focus on drawing when he began teaching. Don Proch took drawing classes with him, and later said that Eyre emphasized that an understanding of drawing is the basis for exploring all other paths in visual art. This is something that would have also affected Diona Thorncroft, who then went on to teach the next generation, including Zama. Just outside the gallery, I've included another work by Zama, his film, A Game of Chess. It's an homage to Marcel Duchamp, who's a big influence for Zama. In this film, people are forced to become chess pieces, and the main character is a polka-dotted pawn, which you can see there. They're seen dancing across a giant chessboard, entertaining an uncanny audience of captivated yet inexpressive masked figures. Here, chess combines the elegance of ballet with the high stakes of a gladiator's ring. Like gladiators, these individuals' fates are not their own. They're controlled by two men simply playing a game of chess, and it's only when the two worlds intertwine and the men playing chess are no longer safe in their own environment that the true winner emerges. The idea for this film came from the costumes of an Oscar Schlemmer ballet, who was the director of the Bauhaus Theater Workshop. Zama said that the project was more about the costumes and the movement, and that the storyline came after. He was working on this around the time of the Arab Spring, and was influenced by the feeling of revolution in the air. I was also really excited to include this work as an extension to Surrealist Suggestions. I think the costumes are really fun and that the dance sequences are really engaging. Film is a really great way, I think, to create surrealist work. As Blair mentioned at the beginning, part of our programming for this exhibit was a night of short films that we put on in conjunction with the exhibit and in partnership with Cinematheque. This short night of short films included Diona Thorncroft's Black Forest Sanitarium. And then we also had a screening of My Winnipeg, which I think is the quintessential Winnipeg surrealist film. And I also think it's a funny example of how filmmakers and artists in Winnipeg are very interconnected, since Marcel Dzama illustrated the cover of the Criterion edition for My Winnipeg. That's really what this exhibition is about. It's the relationships between artists and how their work influenced one another. I was really excited to highlight the work of Robert Nelson, since he had such a big influence during his time here, and yet you don't really see his work that often anymore. His legacy has definitely carried on since he left the School of Art. And I think that the surrealist work that's come out of the school is really unique. And I hope you enjoyed the exhibit if you got a chance to see it.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, for what I'm sure we can all agree is a really interesting and informative parsing through this lineage. I feel like as a relative newcomer to Winnipeg, like I've learned a lot. Thank you so much. Would you be able to entertain a few questions?
I can.
Yeah, if anybody has questions, I would encourage you to ask them in the chat or turn on your camera and your microphone. Speak them out loud and say hello. And if nobody has questions, I would like to ask one.
Yeah.
Do you know what Robert Nelson got up to after his time in Winnipeg? Like you were saying that he isn't a figure that you hear a lot about, although
no, he taught at the University of North Dakota for I think 5 years maybe, and then he moved to South Carolina, and I think he was at South Carolina for nearly 30 years. I think he spent most of his teaching career there, and he lives in Oregon now. Him and his wife have a farm. He still draws all the time. He's very chatty. He loves talking about his time teaching. He's
Yeah. Do you know like has his work like changed, or like what kind of
He
direction or
seems to a
trajectories have
lot. He tends to, yeah, he really develops his style with um as like contemporary art changes and new influences come in. He tends to always uh yeah gets inspiration from everything that's new, and yeah, he's not one to stick to a style. He Yeah, a lot of the art that he has that's in the art gallery in North Dakota, it's a lot of pop art. Actually, he moved in the 60s. He has a lot of like neon lights, and um yeah, actually I went to North Dakota while I was researching this, and I went through their
Oh,
archive,
wow.
and while I was there they had an exhibition just on on local history, on like local artists that had been there, and they had like a number of his works on display actually, and they were all sculptures using neon lights, and just a lot of fun
Wow.
to walk around. Yeah.
Wow. So really this exhibition also kind of charts like kind of how a brief moment in Robert Nelson's like kind of long career, like how kind of like one of the styles that he sort of focused on briefly
Mhm.
kind of did kind of come to influence
Yeah.
and shape, I think, work that still feels like resolutely contemporary and like grows and
Yeah.
changes with the time, but you know,
Mhm.
it kind of bears this like this legacy or influence of surrealism.
Mhm.
I guess I was wondering too about how you think maybe the nature of pedagogy might have changed. Like I think so many of the stories that Robert told you and that you sort of shared with us tonight and in your essay are really fascinating. And then at the same time, I go, oh, like that's a different kind of mentorship than like how professors kind of engage with their students now. I guess
Yeah. Chris Janis had a lot of, I thought, really insightful comments about this when I talked to him very briefly, and he was saying that yeah, when he was in art school, it had the very similar feel where the professors were like your friends, and they everyone was learning from one another. But he, in his opinion, that because tuition prices go up, you can't really pay someone to teach you and then have them learn from you the same way. And that was his take on it, was that with the more like professionalization of the school, you kind of lose that the relationships a bit.
yeah, when you start being in really different kind of income brackets,
Yeah, as well.
that you
Mm-hmm.
can't pretend that you're all scrappy.
Yeah.
Some of you aren't scrappy anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it is a really beautiful testament to how like sort of a really an
Mm-hmm.
approachable figure and a really kind of somebody who was really generous with his time.
Yeah.
You know, kind of like can be really important and influential
Mm-hmm.
on students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was telling me one time that he wanted to experiment with filmmaking while he was here. And one of his students and him made a few films together. Uh, and he said that no one ever saw them, and he would never show them to anyone because
Oh.
he thought they were so embarrassing. But yeah, it was something that him and his students had like worked on together, and that I imagine would have been a lot of fun for everyone involved.
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. I wish that somebody could see them.
No, me
Those kinds of like collaborative activities it can be really fun, but also that's really embarrassing.
too.
We've got a question from Christine here. Is the trip to Chicago how the first and third year students field trips came about?
Yeah. So Nelson was the second prof to take students to the School of Art, or sorry, to Chicago from the School of Art. I think Richard Bowman was the first one. He took them on a trip 2 years beforehand. And then, yeah, Nelson did a trip. And I don't know when the Minneapolis trip started, but that's definitely how the Chicago trip got started. And I think similarly, Nelson never did another trip because he was scared of losing his students. And I think I know the Chicago trip has been reinstated and canceled several times throughout the School of Arts history. And I'm going to assume it's for very similar reasons as well. But yeah.
I just really adore the phrase, in the business of living.
Yeah.
That's like such a diplomatic way of saying like, whoops, kind of went to jail or something. Oh, the Chicago trip was amazing for me in the year. I think it is. It also really proves like it's really important to see real work.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's like kind of a lesson that we're learning again in this like pandemic landscape. That when you see like real artwork in space, like it is a magical thing, and it's different than seeing reproductions in books.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree.
Yeah, so I think it's also a really interesting sort of snapshot or story about like what it's like to learn and live in a smaller community, like pre the internet, pre hopping on a WestJet flight, where it could be like just really so magical to like go to Chicago and see like real art in a museum.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it's a really fascinating tip. Do we have any more questions? Shall we let you maybe head off to bed? Thank you so much, Lindsay, for a really beautiful show. To everyone who's seen it, thank you so much. To folks who haven't, I would encourage you to come and see it before the 24th. And thank you once again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.